Well, hi there, Rosa and John. It's so lovely
Hi.
to have you with us. Rosa, you've got your very impressive office background there.
Yeah, I know. Sorry about that.
Have you read all of these books?
No,
No, they're just for show, aren't they?
they're not actually books. It's just like a front.
It looks on my screen like you've gone to around to John's house and nicked all his books because he
Yeah,
just.
yeah, 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 yeah. That's right. That's why his walls are like there's no books behind
Oh,
him.
John looks like you're being held hostage. Is everything okay, John?
Yeah, it's all great. It's all great.
Hello, John. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Em. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. The house is very quiet. The all the kids are back in school now, so yeah, far less danger of them winding the dog up or running up the stairs or shouting for something or ringing for a lift anywhere. So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm doing all right.
nice. It's kind of a bittersweet moment when September rolls back round.
No,
It's like, no,
just
they're back
sweet.
in school, so I
Uh,
just,
It's just there's no bitterness. No, it's just sweet.
yeah.
It,
Well, I'm super excited for the episode we got planned today. Would you like to introduce who we've got on?
Yeah, me too. So the two people that I've known really well for a long time, Rosa Hunt, who's
Mm.
minister of Salem Baptist Church, Tonteg. That's like part-time, and she's also part-time principal of the Cardiff Baptist College. And yeah, she's just somebody. She was a student placed with us years and years ago. Somebody who just sort of bubbles with faith, just absolutely brimming. So yeah, super excited to have her, and also John Birch, who I also met through the college, and their stories have sort of come together because John and Emma are running a missional community. They've bought a house in Tonteg, and yeah, they want it to be a place where people can come and stay, where people can sort of grow in discipleship, and yeah, they just want it to be this sort of open, shared life, really, where they can demonstrate the kingdoms and Jesus. So yeah, just an amazing journey, and I think when somebody steps out in faith like that, we've
Mm.
always got something to learn. It's always great to talk to them.
Yeah, I'm super fascinated and in awe just of how this all came to be and like the process of like asking God, what do you want me to do? And he's like, I want you to buy a house. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
how did how did that happen?
yeah,
And yeah, just the whole process of getting where they are today. Um, yeah,
yeah,
I'm so
definitely.
excited for it.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because people often say things like, "Oh, and the Lord said to me," or "and God
Mm,
said," and that's often like a really condensed version of the process that they've been through
mm,
to realise how God was speaking to them. And yeah, one of the things I love about both Rosa and John is just their openness to different ways that the Lord might want to speak. And so yeah, it's going to be great. It'll be really good to talk to them.
yeah, and I hope you all enjoy listening as well. To get us into the swing of Team Talk, we'll start with the first question that we ask everyone that comes on the podcast. So, if you had to name one or two key people who have shaped you over the years, who would be on Team Rosa and who would be on Team John?
So I've had to think about this, and I'm going to tell you first about the two people who nearly made the cut, and then I'll go for the one who is my choice, my star choice for
Mm,
Team Rosa. So the two people who nearly made the cut, one was a wonderful woman called Shirley Coyne, and when I was first baptized, which was about 20 years ago, um, she came up to me after giving my testimony and said to me, "You really ought to consider preaching." Now, up to that point, I'd never ever considered doing anything like that because I believe that women shouldn't do that sort of stuff. But I'd heard Shirley preach, and when you heard Shirley preach, you knew that the Holy Spirit was speaking through her. So I said, "Well, no, I can't." She said, "Yes, you can." She said, "Next time I preach, I'll do 10 minutes and you do 10." So I said, "Okay." And I did that. And that was how my preaching ministry began. So, Shirley, ever grateful to Shirley. The other one who nearly made the cut was previous principal of the college when I was a student here in South Wales Baptist College, John Weaver. And John made an everlasting impression on me for particularly two stories I'll tell you quickly that made a huge impression. One was that when we had a college meal one evening, which was a Chinese takeaway, I still remember, and we were all in the small seminar room eating our Chinese takeaway, and I came out to find John doing the dishes. And I thought, he's the principal of the college, and we're all sitting there enjoying ourselves, and he's out here doing the washing up. And that stuck with me. I thought, that's the kind of leader I want to be. And then I also remember when he was leading the preaching class, a terrifying preaching class where you had to preach in front of your peers. And he said to us, what do you think is the most important quality for a minister to have when they're preaching? So we were coming up with all this stuff like you have to know your Bible and you have to speak clearly and not well and all that. And he was like, no, not the most important. And then none of us got it. So he said, the most important thing is you have to have compassion for your people. You have to know your congregation, have compassion for them. And that stuck with me as well. So John Weaver, one of my heroes. But the guy who's made it to my team, Rosa, has got to be my husband, Francis, because we've been married for 30 years this year. And we've just been a team all the way through. And I think one of the things that God does is he takes two very, very different people. You couldn't get two more different people than me and my husband. I'm a sort of impulsive, fiery Maltese short person, and he is a very placid British tall person. And he put us together for 30 years, and we rub up against each other. And through grace, we just grow and we learn from each other and learn to love each other in a completely committed way. And I think it's just from learning in that sort of relationship, and you then go out and you can learn to love other people, and you also understand, if you are loved unconditionally by someone, a little bit of how God loves you. So yeah, person on my team, on Team Rosa, would be Francis.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome. I didn't even make the shortcut, Rosa. I wasn't even a contender. Okay, well that's fine. Yeah, it's
No, I love all throughout that, and it's been a similar theme with everyone we've asked this question to, is that you can't just name one person that's on your team, and whether it's like family members or friends or work colleagues or wherever it is, they're often people that, especially like in your stories then, Rosa, people who you might not necessarily have a lot in common with. Like at the time, like Shirley was a preacher and you didn't think that's something you could do or should do. Then you and the principal of the college, you probably had very little in common. And like you said, you and your husband are kind of opposites, but there's always like that one thing that unites us, and it's always God. And I love how he brings people together to encourage and for us to encourage as well. And then those people end up being on our teams. And yeah, it's
absolutely.
just, you couldn't write it any other way.
Yeah, quite true.
How about you, John?
Again, like I guess similar to most people, there's a couple of people, there's a kind of a basket of people. I was like, oh, who? I'll go with the long one first, and then the short one afterwards. I think the person who probably had the biggest kind of formative impact on me was a man called Roger Grafton. He was the senior pastor at Tabernacle Baptist in Penarth, and he'd been associate with John James. He'd been there prior to that when I came into the life of the church, and I had a fairly sort of long and circuitous journey from like coming to faith at university and then being out in Japan, the Baptist church there, and coming back. And this was really the first place for me to put down roots. And I remember coming into the life of the church, and it's huge positive, really welcoming, really great kind of like biblical teaching, what have you. But the thing that I think Roger did really well, and John James had done with him prior to that, is just this openness to the Spirit in those collective times of worship. In the I'd grown up in various sorts of churches, mostly in Wales, where the expectation was that it was quite a cerebral sort of thing, our Christian faith. It was all about understanding the Bible, understanding the essential truths within it, understanding them for myself, and then well enough to explain to someone else, so they in turn could be someone who could understand it themselves and explain it to someone else. And that was kind of the main expression of your Christian life. And so a lot of the stuff in the Bible, well, same as perhaps some of the more dramatic stuff in the Old Testament, my assumption was, this stuff is like really exciting, but that was for then and this is for now. And so to come into this environment where there was this openness and space given to the Holy Spirit, different people in the congregation would have the opportunity to share, I think I've got something for someone here, and someone would be like, oh yeah, that's me, can I have prayer for that? Prayer for healing, prayer for, just stuff that only God could know and reveal to people. And it was kind of happening. And it was this culture where it was okay. And it wasn't, that sounds kind of weird to anyone who's not a Christian, hasn't been exposed to that. But it was done in this really kind of gentle, matter-of-fact kind of way, no hype, no building it up. And just for Roger, what he modeled there in terms of just partnership with God. And of course, that doesn't only happen in a worship service. But it's a particularly helpful kind of way to learn about these things, to take it into the rest of life. And I'm just thinking, we used to have this time that I'm sure many churches had just before the service, where you go into the back room and everyone kind of gathers in a bit of a huddle and have these kind of prayer times together. And I've been in them somewhere as I've preached around the different churches in South Wales, where it's sort of like an echo of something that was once really powerful. And it's sometimes just a space of like sharing, what are the notices this week and what have you, and then there's 20 seconds of prayer and then we go back in. Whereas this time we had and that Roger made space for there, to make space for God to speak into those meetings, that time in this little prayer room, was just it was exciting in the moment, but it's just ended up being so formative that it's where you got a sense of what is it like when the presence of God comes upon you? What is it like when God speaks? How do you know it's God? How do you know it's not? And that time in that little prayer room, and I'd be in there whether I was serving or not. And there's a kind of a period in my Christian life where I'd serve in a music group, and even when I wasn't, I try and get it to be there, because it was addictive in the best sense of the word. Maybe that's not the best sense of the word. Just being in God's presence and being so consistently, reliably able to come into that and to be part of this expression together of our Christian life, where there was space for God to move. It's been so formative. That's laid the foundation of everything that God has done since then. And Roger was the guy who sort of modeled that and showed that the exciting stuff in the New Testament especially was up for grabs in the here and now, and it didn't have to be super weird. It could be just normal Christians living out that sort of life faithfully with God, with just a bit more helpful instruction. And that's the big one. And then kind of the short one, the other person who I think's had probably the biggest long-term impact, and I'm not sure how it's going to come up on the screen or not as to how much John blushes, but it is actually you, John.
Oh wow!
But you were the minister in my third year placement church when I was a student, and loads of things. Bethel's a wonderful bit of God's family. Beautiful worship, real sense of God's presence there, moving, wonderful people, great heart for God. But it was, I think, what you modeled in leadership of that grace. I remember talking to my wife Emma probably about 3 or 4 months into placement, and I was saying, like, do you know what? I don't think I've heard John say anything critical about anyone like once, like in the whole time, and that might or might not sound like a weird thing, but I think what you model in terms of that grace for people just had such a big impact on the culture of leadership in the church and the culture of the church. And of course, I came in for a year. I don't know what's come previous. I don't know the big picture, but I can say that just that active kind of grace and just the impact that had, which I'd also say is part of why it's such a delight to work with Rosa, because she has that too. I don't know what happens in between your ears and in your silent thoughts, but I can say that kind of modeling of grace and that being a permanent kind of on setting in your leadership is just very, very like easy to work with, very attractive. There's something winsome and godly about it, and it's great. And and may you be thoroughly embarrassed.
Well, thank you. I would love it to be true as well. So but thank you ever so much, and we'll make sure, obviously, you get paid for that as well. And we'll definitely, when we edit this together, that will be probably the highlight.
Just
That'll
on
be the
loop,
that'll
on
be the
loop.
whole
Yeah,
that'll be the whole
And it's
episode right there.
one of the reasons that's such a big deal for me is because by character, how I'm wired, I see things in black and white, and because I see things in black and white, I'm internally often see things in very blunt, stark ways that, unless it's mediated by something, comes off so rude that it makes it impossible for me to work with anyone. And what you modeled there, what God had been sort of sowing into me sort of otherwise and showing me, things like marriage, it's all this stuff sort of coming together, has been so functional and so functionally helpful to me in very, very practical ways, because I'm not by natural inclination a graceful person. And yet what God has done through leaders like you has helped me sort of step into that, where I find it bizarre that people say that, oh, John, you're so graceful about people. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm not, but kind of it's what God's led me into and it's what I've seen. And as far as I'm convinced, it's the only way to be. So, there we are. But it's been a big part of
Thank you, mate. That's very, very kind. Thank you. Fab. Well, it's so lovely to have you guys on, because I've known you both in different ways for years and years, and it's been exciting to watch your sort of stories kind of mingle together, and so that's the story we're hoping to share with people today. So Rosa, if we can go like way back, because I know the church that you pastor in Tonteg, we're praying for something, and you were praying for something really specific. Do you want to tell us what that was?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard actually to think back to how the church was in those days, because it's just completely different how it is now. But basically, one of the first things that we did was we started small groups. There was a traditional Thursday afternoon Bible study, but we decided to start some small groups. I particularly remember being on holiday in America and praying and just feeling that God was saying to me this was something that we needed to do when we got back. So we got back, started a small group, and we started reading various things together. And one of the things we're reading was a book by Daniel Wolpert about different sorts of contemplative of prayer, actually different sorts of prayer. And he had all the usual ones that you would expect, but then he had one that I'd never come across before, and he called it the Impossible Project. And it was meant to be an exercise in faith. And so the idea was that as a church, you got together and you thought, okay, what do we think God would like us to do in this community? And up to that point, it's quite a normal thing to ask. But then here's the catch. It had to be something impossible. It had to be something that you as a church did not have the money or the resources or the time or the people for. And for some reason, I don't know, that snagged at me, and I couldn't forget it. I was like, there's something about this. So I took it to the life group. It was, in the appendix of this book. And we said, yeah, we're going to start praying into this impossible project. And things just started to happen. It's, as I say, it's very hard to kind of think back and remember all the things that started to happen then. But we did start to pray, and we started to, that small group in itself was one that was very open to this kind of language and challenge. What we started to do is we started to use this language with the rest of the church, and we started to talk about the Impossible Project. We started to talk about it on Sunday. We started to pray about it. We started to look at things in Scripture which were impossible. And we're praying, and at the same time, kind of normal stuff was going on in the church, but also abnormal things started happening, such as we formed a link with Tesco in Upper Boat, and they started bringing us some food to distribute it to people in the community. Now, the thing is, every time we prayed about the Impossible Project, we always came up with food. And I don't know whether it's just because we were the people praying, but we always had visions of kind of food and food and food. And so anyway, this was good. And then when Tesco's came, they said, oh, you know what, your kitchen needs a facelift. We'll paint it for you. So okay, they did. And then it's like, oh, we could even give you some frozen food, but you haven't got a freezer. Tell you what, we'll do a staff raffle thing and we'll get you a freezer. And so they did, and they got us a freezer. And this was to start helping the people in the area. We didn't have a proper food bank at the moment, but just some people who were a bit low on kind of food. And so we were perhaps helping 2 or 3 families a week, something like that. It was very small to start with. And then we wanted to start giving out food to the children who came to the youth group, because many of them came and were hungry and things like that. And we were told that we needed but we got in contact with this charity, and the charity said, okay, well, we'll come and inspect your premises, because I'm sure you've got all the things you need. We'll just need to have a look at your fridge, and we'll need to check your
Oh, I think the internet has gone a little bit higgledy-piggledy. Oh, is that just me?
No, I think it's
I've
frozen.
got
a Bible study that night.
Oh, and we're back.
So you froze there, Rosa, for a while.
Oh, what was I saying?
You were saying the charity needed to inspect your fridge.
Yeah, and so I said, okay, fine, you can come and inspect our fridge. They said, can we come tomorrow? I said, no, please come Monday. And I put down the phone. I was like, oh, we haven't got a fridge, and we certainly haven't got a level 3 food hygiene.
Wow.
So just email around the church, so we need to buy a fridge. So they said, yeah, we'll buy a fridge. And we'll buy a fridge. But I said, what about the level 3 food hygiene? And one of the people in the Impossible Group prayer group said, oh, that's crazy. She said, about a month ago, I felt God saying to me, go and do a level 3 food hygiene.
Wow.
Or level, and she'd done it, or level 2, whatever it is, the one that was needed. And so she said, yeah, I got it. It was Jan.
Wow.
And so Jan came, and Monday came, and the charity came and inspected the place. We had the hygiene, we had the fridge, brand new. And so we were good to go. And then, okay, so a number of things happened. So we started to see that the Impossible Project was something about reaching out to helping people in the community. We were talked through, one of our members worked for Tier Fund, and she talked us through a Tier Fund kind of community audit, which helped us to identify the needs in the community, but also the causes of those needs. Just like, you know, a tree has branches and roots, what we were seeing was hunger, and we were seeing certain problems on the surface, but they were caused by deep down things. And so we needed to think about, as a church, what God was calling us to address. And we started to think about maybe addressing mental health issues as well. And I remember going for a walk up the Garth and thinking, oh God, this is all very well. There's a million things we can do. There's a million people we can help. It seems like we're putting this away, but I can't do it all. And I felt God saying, okay, you need a partner. So great. And I went into college, and I can't remember why. And see, the washing up place is quite significant. And I ended up doing the washing up with this student. And I was talking to him about what he wanted to do. And he was saying that he wanted to do something different, ideally in Wales, something pioneering, something about starting some sort of religious community thing, something with some sort of social action thing. So, oh, that sounds really interesting, because we're looking at this Impossible Project. And it was John. So once again, doing the washing up with the John was a very important moment at that holy sink in the college. And so we invited John and Emma to come and visit us, and they came along to a couple of Impossible Project meetings. John then was seeking a church that he could partner with. And this is obviously important for a pioneer, because if you have a church that has an established position in the community, you get some sort of credibility and so on. John and Emma worked with us for a year. And during that time, whatever John says, the thing that most struck us was his grace and his graciousness. And we loved him. We love him. We love Emma. We love the children. And when it came to vote on calling him to be our associate minister, that was unanimous. Yes, please, John, come and do that. And so he was ordained as a Baptist minister to serve alongside, but in a totally different role. And as in, he's never had any fixed preaching or pastor responsibilities. It's always whatever he feels God is calling him to do. He's completely free to that. I've got to say, we don't pay him either. So, I mean, you know, so it's fair enough. But yeah, and then one really interesting thing that happened was that we looked at our priorities, and we thought the food bank was a priority, but also mental health, because loneliness and isolation are two huge things. So we changed the charitable objectives of the church to cover poverty, but also loneliness and isolation, as well as sharing the Christian religion, which is the standard one for all Baptist churches. And we were praying about this when John went to preach in a church, and he mentioned this, and it so turned out that there was a mental health consultant in the congregation who then started to liaise with us, and we set up a Shalom Center, which is now a Renew Wellbeing Center, where we welcome people with mental health issues. I'll say the last thing, which is that when COVID struck, because we already had a lot of contacts in the community, we were known for helping and reaching out and so on. We already had an existing food bank, which was very small. We helped about 6 families a week. Suddenly, food bank demand just rocketed very rapidly. It went up to feeding 60 people a week. And I was not coping with the number of people who were phoning up saying, can you pick up this stuff from the chemist, give me your number, can you get me this prescription, and so on. And John said, well, actually, that's something that Emma would be brilliant at organizing. So Emma took on the mantle of food bank, John's wife, and it grew and flourished with her gifting and her, fantastic relational ability. And at the beginning, I was quite involved with that. And then I got COVID. Well, I think it was COVID. I got very sick towards the beginning of the pandemic with all the COVID symptoms. There was no testing then, so I can't be certain. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. So I was out of action for a while. And then when I came back and I stepped into the food bank, and I just felt God saying to me, you know what, you don't need to be here. This is, I don't want you to do this anymore. Get out the way. Let Emma go. She's doing really well. So I got out the way and I let Emma do her own thing. And now we actually employ, well, we don't employ, but we pay, there's an important difference, a food bank coordinator. Emma's the food bank manager. We pay a food bank coordinator because the work is big. We also have a food bank development person. So there's a team of 3. We have a team of 3 running the Shalom Renew Wellbeing Center, one of whom is also paid. We have a community garden that's just grown and grown and grown. In so many ways, we are feeding people.
I was thinking, Rosa, when, because we all read books and we all read about other people's great ideas. But when you read something like, what we should really be doing as Christians is praying that God would give us an impossible task to do. I just, one of the things I've always loved about you is just the sense of a really vibrant faith. Just really the energy of your faith is contagious. But how did that go down when you said to the church, right, we want to pray that God gives us, could it be really easy as a leader to be attracted to things which are really sustainable and manageable and things that we know we can do? But it kind of reminds me of, Francis Chan's book, Forgotten God, where he talks about, I don't want my life to be explainable without the Holy Spirit. And when you go after something like that and see God begin to shift things and change the atmosphere, it does something not just to your faith as a leader, but I'm sure to the faith of the church as well.
You see, it really mattered to me because I know everybody in ministry for a long time will understand this, but you've got to know that God is real, because every week you're preaching it and you're living it. And from time to time, of course, you ask yourself, is this actually true? This thing that I'm trying, that I've bet my whole life on, I've staked everything on it. Is it actually true? And so for me, I needed that exercise in faith. I needed to say to God, look, I'm going to step out and I'm just going to see what happens. And gosh, he came good in so many ways. But like you say, he didn't just come good for me. So that moment was a holy moment in the life group, in the Impossible Project life group, when Jan said, we've got that food hygiene thing, And it was just things like that kept on and on happening. And I'll never forget one of my deacons coming to me and saying, you're going to like this, she said, I was in the kitchen yesterday and the boiler stopped working. So I thought to myself, what would Rosa say? Rosa would say, pray. So I prayed and the boiler lit.
Yeah.
Now, I'm telling you, if I'd been there and prayed, I don't think the boiler would have lit. I don't think God needs, I don't need God to demonstrate that. But that, for that woman, that was her moment when
Yeah.
she suddenly thought, this impossible project is true.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason that people have lost confidence in mission and so on, we've lost confidence in the gospel. We've forgotten that this is real, this thing we're talking about. And so what happened with us is that God started showing up again and again and again. And I don't know whether John will mention this, but John has a particular gift for healing. And so again, something that's happened is that several times John has prayed for people in the congregation and they have received healing. And that is something that really changes people's hearts as well. So yeah,
amazing, absolutely amazing.
And I'd say tied in with that, just in case we don't get to it later, there's something about the format of the language of the Impossible Project that is massively gentle, and I feel like it could be taken into any context, in pretty much any denomination, no baggage or anything like that. Whereas if you went in with different language, said, church, we're going to pray for God's miraculous power to be evident, we're talking about the same thing, but that language I think would put off certain people. They'd have all sorts of theological questions about, like, oh, hang on, this, that, and the other. Just the way it comes across, I just think there's something just very, very valuable in that. You could do it with anyone. It's non-threatening, but it gets people very quickly to the heart of exercising that faith with God and that partnership with Him, that out of which comes some pretty spectacular stuff.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it sounds like such a massive thing when you say the Impossible Project, but actually the way you just spoke about it, when you actually think about it, there's something quite simple to it, because actually if you think of Christianity as a religion, we can get caught up in we come to church and we sing our songs and we listen to the person preaching or whoever it may be, but actually at the heart of having a faith and being a Christian then is the Impossible Project of God, we want to see your kingdom come, so what how you call me to do that, what do you want me to do? And actually it is an impossible project because we don't know what it is yet. We don't know what God is calling us to do, so we have to pray and ask him where he's leading us to. And sometimes we can miss that and get caught up in the churchiness of it then. But actually what you've done is just brought it back to the simplicity of what God is calling us to do. And that was amazing how you shared that.
No, I think you're right, because we read passages, I think it's in Romans, but the principal of the Bible College could probably tell me if it's not. But there's a bit where Paul says, if you say with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. And now that's that's a verse that gets quoted. But actually, in just believing that, you've already believed the impossible. So it's step one is believing the impossible.
Yeah.
So John, if you can take us back to obviously before the holy sink in the Baptist College and before that conversation.
Place of great anointing.
We're all going to be queuing up then, aren't we? Next time with that. But because when we had a chat years ago when you were a student here, I was asking, where did you think you'd end up being? And because the other thing that this great John's got a tremendous teaching and preaching gift, and just was wondering where you sort of saw that going. And you began to explain to me this vision that you and Emma had for a long, long time. Do you want to take us back to that vision and what it was and how it's grown?
And if I could just take us back a little bit further to make sense of that. So when I came to faith 2002, so that makes me a 19-year-old in the faith, I think. I was given, I guess there's two things there. With sort of the light bulb going on, oh, wow, Jesus loved this and did this for me before I did anything for him. And I was just like, oh, wow, I'd grown up in church. No, that never sunk in. It'd probably been said 1,000 times, but it never sunk in. I was like, all in. I'll give my whole life to this. Just it makes so much sense. It'd be bonkers to do anything else. And I was given, I think, 3 books that I read by someone who's a little further on in the faith. It was Hudson Taylor biography of him, who led the China Inland Mission. There was Jackie Pullinger, who had a ministry in the, I think it was Forbidden City. Hang on, Forbidden City in Hong Kong. And David Wilkerson's Cross and the Switchblade. So they're all kind of solid, kind of like classics of sort of Christian sort of stories about what God gets up to with people's lives, and that kind of set a bit of the sort of tempo. So I was kind of all in, yeah. You know, martyrdom next week. Oh well, let's go for it. Yeah, that kind of thing. I guess there's two things with that. I'd always anticipated that if God was going to call me to do anything, it'd be something kind of missiony. And just because of my interests and things like that, I spent the next, a couple of years from then, I spent a year out in Japan. I thought, like, oh, clearly this is like God leading me to be a missionary in Japan. All of it all seems so logical. He's lining all these things up. I'm learning Japanese. I'm out here. I'm learning the culture, all the rest of it. I came back to the UK. Years pass. I meet Emma, who's not my wife at that point, and you know, where's she just been? Oh, she's back from China. She's back from Vietnam, where she's been teaching, and you know, we got to know each other. We got engaged. We got married, and then in the midst of that, we started exploring calling and things like that, and that's a whole other fun story. But the natural kind of the logical thing, like people looked at us, we looked at our situation. If God was going to call us to anything, it would be, you know, missionary work, probably in East Asia. Like he'd been laying that foundation. It seemed so obvious, and yet God, at a time when he was speaking in all sorts of areas of life, relatively, you know, clearly, you know, you open the Bible. What are you showing me here today, God? Oh, it's that. Oh God, you know, is there any area of my life that's not kind of in sync with you? Is there any kind of sin in there? Oh, it's that. I should do something about that. Really kind of clear and direct. And we were asking him, like, hey God, what should we do with our lives? And so it's into that kind of stepping into that silence, which I guess is, you know, God has led us so far. He wants to see what we want to do, and what do we do when, you know, he isn't giving us like the, you know, the individual instructions. And so had been obedient in kind of responding to God when we said, you know, go train in the college in Cardiff. And so we've done that. And so we come 2 years into it, coming into that year when I was with you in Bethel, John, and then praying, okay, God, like, we've been obedient this far, called to train, but train for what? What comes next? And we looked at a bunch of different things. We'd been across to Rabina Baptist, where they had got some folk from an organization called 3DM, Three Dimensional Mission, Mike Breen. They'd done some fun stuff up in Yorkshire, and were sharing the model, missional communities. It's a kind of catch-all term for lots of different things. But we thought, oh, do you know what? We've been searching, asking, we've been praying. It seems like this sort of thing is going to be it. It is like church, but it's church with really strong emphasis on like getting out there in the community, getting to know people, building relationship, introducing people to Jesus out of those relationships. We thought, oh, clearly this is it. Okay, it wasn't, you know, the missionary thing overseas. We've been up to the missionary center in Birmingham and to talk to missionaries, things like that. And then God is like, and so we were sort of like processing this all the time. We thought, oh, clearly this missional communities thing is it. And by the time we were reaching this conclusion, we'd already committed to go out to visit a friend of ours who'd been in a church in Bristol. She'd played with us in a worship band in our home church, and she moved out to Bristol to be part of a church there called Woodlands Church. They've got a number of different sort of plants with them as one sort of big overarching church, and one of them, the elements of that, they had Christians living together in community in sort of houses that you might have 12 in a smaller one, you might have 25, 30 in a larger one. And we had teased her something mercilessly when she told us she was going out there to live in one of these things. And we all sorts of jokes about, like, you know, cults and this, that, because it's a bit weird. But we'd already, but we heard they were doing some really great stuff in the community, and that actually, like, life in community in houses was actually like pretty helpful in terms of like discipleship and stuff. So we went out there for a day because we'd already committed to do this, even though we'd already concluded God was calling us in a different direction. And we just spent the whole day sort of seeing what life was like in the community houses, how these different social enterprises were, where they had Christians out there in the community in some retail stuff. They had a gallery, a bakery, a secondhand clothes shop, that sort of thing. Having Christians out there, building relationships with people in the community, being able to, you know, if someone comes in, you in the course of small talk, oh, they've got a need, you can offer to pray for them. And that's entirely fine, because, you know, that's kind of your purpose there. And we were just like, oh, wow, there's something really interesting here. And we asked hundreds of questions. How does this work? How does that work? Because it's so countercultural to our own kind of like culture of church, our own culture of like, you know, living in a house in a kind of like nuclear family and that side of it. And it's, I was thinking about this today and thinking just on, there's something about it, sometimes very, very small events just have this just big sort of life-changing impact. And we were out there with our eldest son, Daniel, who's about 3 at that point. And in the particular house that we had this contact with, there was this young mum there called Kate. She had a son, I think it's called Caleb. And he got his toys out for Daniel when we were visiting there, when we were chatting and asking these hundreds of questions about how does this work? How does that work? What about this? And as we got back there towards the end of the day before we said bye-bye, you know, Caleb asked his mum, oh, can I, you know, can I do that? And she's like, yeah, go on, ask him. And he came up to my son and said, you know, I see you really like this kind of like railway like toy that you've been playing with. It's like that kind of, it's been so long since we've been into it. That kind of wooden one that kind of fits together like jigsaw pieces, and you have the little wooden trains. Anyway,
Brio? I want to say Brio.
Yeah, that's it. Big box of this Brio stuff. And he was saying like, you know, do you want this? Do you want to take this away? And we were like, oh wow, like here's a lad who's grown up in community, being just massively generous, and it not being a big thing, it just being a natural thing. And as we were driving back, we were thinking, hang on, maybe this is the thing God's calling us to do. And I think it's so much of what we've then done has hinged on that one tiny little act of generosity and kindness of what that young lad showed our boy Daniel, that we thought, do you know what, there's something here. I think you can grow up all right in community. Actually, I think there's something attractive about this life in community that gets us closer to, or can get us closer to, the life that Jesus wants us to live. And so we came away sort of chanting all this through, and that was kind of the thing that pushed us over the line, and to being like, okay, we've got to kind of do this. And so we went back. We had this meeting with Rosa over the sink. A couple of months later, we went back out there to live ourselves in community for a month, because we really wanted to know, okay, it's one thing that we have a sense of what God's calling us to. We need to have to kind of go all in with this. We need that confidence so we can hack it, or at least that's how we thought. And it isn't a very faithful way of putting it, but we wanted to know whether we could hack it. And the only way to do that is to practically do it. So we did that for a month and processed it, lots of challenges and all the rest of it, and then had the chance in the last year at college to really sort of pull it apart, work out, okay, we see what we've seen there, inner city Bristol. What are the principles there that we can take, that God has shown us, to put it and give life to it somewhere in Wales? So we're able to do that, think theologically about it, reflect on it. And then that started the journey with us with Salem, in terms of we came across this community of faith who were thinking like, okay, how can we do the impossible with God? And we were thinking like, that's what it feels like with us too. Hey, there's a meeting of minds here. There's faith. And that was just so massively attractive. And again, it seemed like if you're there, like, you know, having a cuppa in the same room, it would seem like such a small thing. But for us, that was, oh, wow, it's faith. Oh, wow, yeah, we can make this work here. This is good. And, you know, there's been an awful lot of, I forget, I'm not the best with dates, but it's been quite a few years for us to get from that point to where we are now. But there's something about that impossible project kind of principle that rhymes with us, in that when we were at the outset of having a sense of this is what God's calling us to, and like, okay, how do we do it? It's kind of like so big, you know, we've seen this massive thing in inner city Bristol. How do we start? I was put it in that kind of language of, you know, the still small voice of God. Okay, it's that, you know, God speaks to us in so many different ways that, you know, people in the Bible experience God speaking, communicating with them. And there was just that sense of that kind of sentence that suddenly becomes imprinted on your brain when you're kind of praying these things through, and you think, oh, that's probably God. And it was something like, I'm going to get it slightly wrong. It's something like, because you waited to listen to what I wanted you to do, I'm going to make this possible. And so that's kind of the principle of it. The practical outworking was we had to depend on God to make everything available to do it. So we couldn't sell our house. We weren't free to do that, because that wasn't, if you like, there were sort of cuffs on. Like, you can follow God in this, but you follow me on the road of faith, not on the road of doing it under your own steam. And because of that, we've had to do things differently. We had to form a charity. We had to do X, Y, and Z. We had to work with more people than we'd ever thought we'd have to. And we've done this jointly between the Baptist Union of Wales, South Wales Baptist Association. So it's a joint thing in complementary areas that we wouldn't have done if we'd done it under our own steam. So, you know, going God's way has been awkward. It's been long. It's required huge amounts of perseverance, and, you know, so we're almost giving up half a dozen times because of X, Y, and Z, and all these sort of brick walls we come up against. And every time God has sort of pushed us on. And also, it's, even though our sort of thread of it exists in parallel to what's going on in Salem, there's this kind of element that God has been calling, like, us and the church into this kind of stepping out into things that we can't do under our own steam. And that's just been, I wouldn't rather do anything else. I mean, you ask anyone, like, who's at the center of, like, you know, God's will for your life. Yeah, I'm doing it. I don't want to step out of that kind of, like, obedience. That becomes the most important thing, far more than the rest of the stuff that used to be important. So,
That's amazing. There's so much in there. One of the things I've loved about both the ways in which the two of you have shared, actually, is sometimes God will take, like, the smallest thing, you know, like a conversation by a sink, or a little kid's brio set, you know, and it's sometimes we look for the big, don't we, and the dramatic. John, I think you mentioned the still small voice, and yet there's something about those little moments, and I think you've both used the word hinge, that do seem to swing things and move things. Yeah, amazing.
I think the other thing that bears sort of emphasizing is that most of these things that the church has stepped out into started small. God's kind of providence, his making something happen that wouldn't happen otherwise, has been comparatively small. You go to a mega church and you tell them about God making a fridge available, they'd be like, that's maybe a disservice to mega churches and what have you. They're expecting kind of God to do, like, you know, make a building available or something like that. And yet there's something about recognizing God authentically in that small thing that means, you know, it's like the parable of the talents. You know, you're faithful with a little, God can trust you with more. You're faithful with the more, I believe he can trust you with even more. And it's kind of stepping into that. You know, the food bank started off teeny, but we were faithful with it. The church was faithful with it. The mental health drop-in cafe, the Shalom Center, it started small. We have facilities in need of great improvement. You would not necessarily, you'd be impressed by the love and the welcome, but you wouldn't necessarily be impressed by some of the facilities which we've had in the past, which have since been improved. But it started small, it didn't look great, but faithful with that little thing, and it's just built and built, and it's it's just really exciting. It's hard work, but it's exciting to be in the middle of it.
And so, John, you sort of hinted there at the end about it's been tricky, you know. And I think there's a little bit of a myth sometimes in our lives, isn't it? That once we know what God wants us to do, well, then from then on it should be, because this is God doing it, right? And this is God's way. So we're just going to sail through. And almost sometimes you catch yourself thinking, when you hit roadblocks and difficulties, well, maybe it's not God's will then. Maybe I misheard it, or but it's, I know it's been work to get where you are today. So tell us a little bit, you know, from both your perspectives about that journey, and how you've had to sort of persevere through.
Just quickly, I think perseverance, I think, has been the key thing, and I suspect is one of the key things to doing something new with God, and possibly to doing, like, anything, even the conventional things, well and faithfully with God. I think what has been most valuable in those moments is having, like, immediately and practically, not to make it just about this, but having a kind of written record. What has God said? When did God say it? To go back to it, and then to be able to go back to God in prayer and say, okay, God, you've sent us on this direction. We've tried to do that as faithfully as we can. are we still meant to be heading in this direction? Because we don't want to be following directions you gave us, 2 years ago, and missing the one you're giving us right now, because you just got off course. So being able to go back and say, what has God said? What is the kind of testimony that He's given us, to have other people pray into it, especially that best thing, godly people who know nothing of your situation. Can you pray for me? Just open like that, and they, whether it's a verse, whether it's a scripture, when they describe the situation you're in, when they describe how God wants you to respond to that, and you're like, you've nailed it. And just be able to get that, like, authentic, something that you recognize as God. You read the Bible, you pray, you kind of know when it's God, just through that kind of built up experience kind of with Him, just to go back to the source, go back to God, and you get that sense of, no, God says persevere, keep going. There's I think it's the start of Joshua, there's a verse about not to the right nor to the left, and that a key moment when we were like, oh gosh, it seems too much, to have God sort of highlight that and be like, okay, it's really weird thing that God's called us to. It's nothing like we'd have chosen, but God's saying, not to the right, not to the left. Okay, stick with what I've done. Okay, let's do that. But when it comes from God, it carries weight. Just advice from someone. I love encouragement. Encouragement is so great and valuable, but it's always going to be second to that kind of fresh kind of word of God, confirming like a call, or confirming going one way or another. You get that, you get in God's presence, and it just puts everything else in perspective, and you kind of cool off a bit, and you have to go back into it again and again. But going back to God, huge help in persevering and going the course.
Yeah, I think that's really key. We live in a society or time where like it's important to be proactive and to be always like striving for the next thing, and like everybody now has like a job but also has what they call like a side hustle or something like that. Like we're called to always be being proactive and working for something. And actually when God has trusted you with something, or you feel like God is speaking to you about what He's calling you to do, there's such a fine line between like being proactive with what God is calling you to do and not just like sitting and waiting for it to like pass you by or something. So I think what you've done is walk that fine line really well. And actually, because sometimes being proactive, we can miss what God is calling us to do. But you've just come back to actually what has God told us already? And God, what are you telling us now? Are we still going the right direction? Are we still doing what you're calling us to do? Do we need to take a left turn? Do we need to take a right turn? Like instead of just plowing through, it's always coming back, bringing it back to God. And actually, it's not, even though I feel like you're calling me to do this, it's not actually about me. It's about what you want, God. So let's keep coming back to that. And yeah, I'm so fascinated and intrigued by this whole situation. Yeah, sorry, I feel like I cut across then.
No, not at all.
No. I think something I'd like to say at this point is I'd just like to say how amazing our church is, because it's just a traditional Welsh Baptist chapel, small number of people, many of them relatively older, and they've just taken this on board, and they've just been so super supportive, super up for things. And as they've prayed and seen things happen, then their own sort of attitudes towards it have changed. But it's been a journey for very, very much the whole church together. So yeah, it's just great. And I think, we're very blessed to have this church, but I think this can be true of every church. This isn't what I'm trying to say is that even though, of course, our church members are, in fact, the best church members of any church anywhere in the world, and I want to make that quite clear. However, I think this is not something exceptional that God is doing in Salem. I think this is God's desire for all churches everywhere, to grow in faith like this. So, yeah.
That's amazing. So where do you guys see this going next? Because I know you guys now have the house and you're in. Where do you think it goes next?
Well, something really, really awesome that happened recently was that I got a phone call out of the blue from a lady from the council, from RCT, and she said that she'd like to set up a neighborhood network. And this is something that they've been doing in various areas. And the idea is that you choose a hub in a community, hub that already has a lot going on to benefit the community, and you make that hub a centre of neighbourhood services. And so you get social prescribers there, you get people who can help people find jobs, you get the third sector, you get the food banks, you get the mental health support, and it's all centred in this hub. And then people can talk to each other, have a joined up service of provision for the community. I said, oh, sounds great. That's always what I thought we should have. And she said, so could we have it in Salem? Would you like to be the hub? I was like, this has been my dream. This has been my dream all along, and for it to just to come from the outside rather than us pushing it, that was incredible. So I said, oh yes, please. So I said, well, what are we going to call this thing? And she said, well, what do you want to call it? Because it's your network. So we decided on CF38 network, which is kind of our geographical postcodes. I didn't want to exclude anyone by making it, a Christian name, because this is to serve the whole community. But the fact that, RCT have asked us to host it and to be the center of the hub, oh, what an amazing moment that was. And so that's happening next week. And we're having, John is coming to represent the Foundry. We're having people from the food bank coming. We're having social prescribers. We're having people from the Shalom Center. We're having, as I say, people who sort of facilitate work, having people from the community garden. And I think the local councillors have been invited, and RCT is chairing it. Yeah. And it's just setting up this hub to get everybody to talk to each other, to share best practice, and to say how everybody's serving the community, and how we can work together then to make sure that if we have a concern about a particular individual, we know whom we can talk to. So at the moment, there isn't that sort of joined up thinking, I suppose, in the area. But to me, that was, so if you'd said to us 10 years ago, yeah, you're going to be the centre of this neighbourhood hub, and all of that, we're like, yeah, right. But there we go. So,
that's amazing.
Yeah. And I hope this isn't the end of the Impossible Project, because I'll never forget one of our members, Jenny, when we proposed something, and she said, do you think that's impossible enough?
Oh, wow.
And that sticks in my head. So every time somebody says something now, like, I'm not sure that's impossible enough.
That's amazing. Well, they asked you to name it. I thought you were going to go for Mission Impossible or something. That would have been... Yeah. That's amazing. Oh, well, guys, it's been so good to talk to you. It's been exciting just to hear the journey. And, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
You've been listening to Team Talk, a new podcast series from the South Wales Baptist Association.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like, share and subscribe.
Find us on Facebook, YouTube or Instagram.
And for more information, check out swba.org.uk/Team Talk. Thanks for listening.